Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Saturday morning's review of the state content for your real estate exam. If you were with me on Tuesday evening, we didn't quite finish the contract portion of it, so we're going to resume there and move right into the final portion of this review here. We're going to be doing some math here, some prorations. So this is a great class if you're having some struggles with working with math and some of the things you'll be facing on the exam. So we're going over some of those with you this morning too as well. But we're going to pick up where we left off on Tuesday evening with me, and we're finishing up on contracts. We finished the contract of purchase, and now we are going into this form here, which is the agreement to revive a contract. So this is a new form. Again, look at the very top box, and you'll see where you have the latest and greatest form here. This was done last year, January 20. Real important form this one is to revive a contract. So you recall when I was going over the purchase agreement with you, the paragraph 3 where it had all the, or 4 rather, where it had all the dates and deadlines. Was it 3 or 4? I can't remember now. Anyways, the point I'm making here is if you have a objection to a thing like title or objection to the inspection, then you send it over to the seller to resolve that. And if you don't have a resolution, then that terminates. Well, sometimes with all best intentions, we miss a date and we didn't mean to miss that date. And both sides agree that it was a mistake, an unintentional oversight, that we missed a date and now the contract legally would be terminated. Well, with this form here, if both sides are okay, it was just an oversight, we didn't get the resolution in time, midnight came, and now the contract is ended. Well, we didn't really want to do that. We want to keep the thing going. So that's what this form is for, to revive that contract, keep it moving forward. So it was terminated on a certain date, but they want to revive the contract. Now you don't have to rewrite an entire new contract. We revive the one that was there. When you rewrite a whole new contract, all terms can change. So this way, we can still keep the same terms we had. You know, we just missed a date or something, and we can use this form to do that. It was a really cool form they came up with. Dual contracts, it's unlawful to submit a contract to a lender institution that's different than the one used to build, to buy and sell or build. So this is fraud, illegal in Colorado. We're not showing the bank the true nature of what the purchase is by showing a false form, a false purchase agreement, to try to get more money out of it. To give an example of that here, it's just that kind of stuff actually was going on during the recessionary period. All right, another rule here for you, F, really easy to remember because this one assists us to comply with the Conway-Bogue rule, meaning that we have to use commission-approved forms. So with this in mind, some of your test questions are going to be, what kind of font and size and color do we use? How do we fill it out? We always want to reproduce the form exactly as it's written. We can line items out in the form as long as it's not redacted, right? It's not a government thing you're doing where it's all blacked out. If you're going to line something out, you got to be able to see behind it what was lined out. All right, you can do that. You can also omit an entire section. For instance, in the purchase agreement, if you recall, there's a whole section about if you were to assume a loan. Well, you could omit that section because it doesn't apply to the transaction that you're doing. As long as you still keep the heading of that section there and just state next to it that was omitted. Now, all of the electronic software out there does this for you. So don't worry about the mechanics of it. Just understand that you're allowed to do it, and it could come in the form of a test question on your state exam. So you can omit next to the headline. You got to fill in the blanks using a different font size or color. So there's no confusion. You don't want to make it all the same. So it's nice and pretty. No, it's not the point. There are areas where we can make changes, and we need to make those clear to our clients. Those are the areas that the changes are being made. You cannot draft an addendum to the contract and they get some clarity. It says write on a napkin, or go on your Word program or whatever and start drawing up a contract. Your Conway-Bogue authority is limited to the scope of the approved contracts by the Real Estate Commission. You may not draw up your own contracts. You may not charge a fee for doing contracts. That's not part of the Conway-Bogue authority that you have. Home builders are exempt from using the state-approved forms. Home builders do not come under the umbrella of the Real Estate Commission. They're separate from that. They have the building department to contend with. They have zoning to contend with. They don't have anything on the state as far, because they're not, remember when you work for a home builder, if you're an employee, you're not required to have a real estate license. So therefore, they're not regulated by the Real Estate Commission. So therefore, they don't have to use the state commission forms, and most of them don't. Some do because of the ease of it, but they don't have to. In fact, that representative that's working for the home builder who is not licensed, and they are reviewing the contract that the home builder's attorney drew up. Okay, so remember, they always those folks work for the builders, so they have the builder's interests in mind. Again, we don't practice law. We only fill out those contracts. We do not give legal advice. And that's the question you may see on the exam is, can you answer the question? When somebody asks, what do you think, what title I should take as far as, joint tenancy or tenancy common? What's the best one for me? That's legal advice. Do not do that. If they ask, however, can you explain the differences between these? That's a question you can answer. You're expected to. But to give legal advice, that's something you don't want to do, or you're not able to do. Okay. Rule F, certain finance sections can be removed by marking them omitted if they do not apply to the contract. Again, on approved contracts, when computers are used, the computer system must allow for different color, size, or fonts for the blanks. And there is a company up in startup in Denver called CTM. And you might want to get your contracts from them. Okay. Deeds of trust, promissory notes. So again, we see you go on the website and you'll see some deeds of trust, promissory notes. So if someone doesn't have their earnest money, you can get a promissory note for that earnest money. If the seller accepts it, then that's the form of the earnest money. You're under contract. So here's the thing, though: the promissory note is it's up to the seller to collect that, and if there's a promissory note for earnest deposit. But the deeds of trust, promissory notes for loans and stuff, again, we can see that on the website. Here's something we see on the exam. Deed of trust, there are clauses called acceleration for the entire amount to become due on sale, and strict. And we cover this pretty deep in the finance section, the national portion of the exam. So if you missed that, come visit us or go look at the recorded videos and you'll see explanation of that. Let's see, UCC, usury. Okay, here's some crossover, folks, from the national portion of the exam to the state portion of the exam. They do talk about usury in the national portion of the exam, and what they refer to is that each state has a maximum amount of interest rate that the state is allowed to charge, and that's usury. Now you're going to learn what it is in Colorado, because that's where your question could come from. We know that usury is illegal. That's to charge an interest rate in excess of what the state will allow. So here in Colorado, here's what you need to know. What's the definition for a lender? You're lending money in more than 5 transactions per year. You're considered a commercial lender, subject to usury law, more than 5 per year. That's the first part. If you're doing more than 5 per year, the maximum rate you can charge is 21%. You're a commercial lender. If you're making 5 or fewer transactions, remember it's 5 or fewer. So over 5, you're commercial, but 5 or fewer, you're underneath the wire. Now the maximum rate you can charge is 45%. Yeah, big number. So know those numbers and how that usury works for those Colorado State exam. A little more detail. Prepayment penalty is an example of predatory lending. Prepayment penalties went away for mortgage loans. So any kind of mortgage loan that would have a purchase money mortgage loan that would have a payment penalty would be an example of predatory lending. Now, okay, a buyer may use a promissory note for earnest money. The promissory note must be redeemed at or before closing. Seller's agent is not responsible for collecting on a bad promissory note. The seller is responsible for collecting. We've seen that on the exam, folks. So remember, the seller is responsible for collecting that promissory note for earnest money. Therefore, seller's agent should inform the seller about the pros and cons of a promissory note as earnest money. Follow their lead. That's the coaching part. Seller's agent should inform them, and follow their lead. That's the coaching part. Transaction broker should also inform the seller, but then follow their lead. That would be inappropriate for a referee, wouldn't it? Just bringing up some examples here for you. All right, we're going to look at some disclosure documents now. These are standard disclosures that would be required in a file to be compliant. First one is the square footage disclosure. Okay, when you have a building, a structure on the property, you need to have a square footage disclosure. And we're going to take a look at this, what it looks like here. It says your listing broker should personally verify the number of square feet in the building. There's different ways to do that. We don't have to measure it. We should only do the things that we are qualified to do. So let's take a look at this disclosure form. We're disclosing to the other side, this comes from the seller side, what the square footage of the property is. Okay, so we put the property address in here, and then the licensee measurement. This is the methodology, how to measure the property. But look at the first choices. I have a choice to check the box. Either I have or have not measured it. Has or has not. So I stopped measuring properties a long time ago, folks. Just one of the most least favorite things that I had to do was measure properties. So I always check the box. I've not measured the property. That's okay. You can do that. Now, where other source are you getting the measurements from? Now, if you do know how to do it, and you can use one of these methodologies to do measurements, then fine, you do so. You put the date that it was measured and the square footage of result. If not, like you do like me, you do not measure it. And then now you list the source. Where can you get different sources for measurement? I've used all of these. So a prior appraisal, you can find sometimes with the date of that appraisal and result. You can use building plans. I've gone even gone into builders' offices, and say, hey, there's a model we're doing a sale on, and you've got the building plans. Can I get a copy of that, please? And I've gotten those. Some of them are online. Some of them are filed with the building department that you can find. So that's a good source sometimes. The assessor's office, one of the more common areas we go to is the assessor's office. Sometimes they're not accurate though, especially if people have added on to the property. So be careful of that. But you can start there and use the assessor's office, the date that you pull the report and the result. Some other kind of form you found, and you put that on there and you put it and you describe it, but you disclose what the square footage is. Okay. If it's a concern, property should be independently measured. It says right there, if it's a concern. This is a contention that can come up in court later on. All right, here's a seller's property disclosure we'll look at next. So this form, as you recall, is provided for sellers to disclose the condition of the property. Are they required to use this form? No. Are they required to disclose the condition of the property per state Colorado law? Yes. See the difference there? They're required to disclose the condition, but they don't have to use this form. We provide this form for them for the ease of satisfying the requirement, right? So based on the seller's current knowledge, they fill out the form. If they don't want to do it, you got to ask them, okay, what do I ask the buyer? What do I tell the buyer when they ask me for? Good question. Why aren't you filling out the form? Now, some sellers just on practice do not. For instance, any kind of repossession property, bank-owned property, VA repo, HUD repo, you're not going to get a seller's property disclosure. You will get a disclosure from them, the condition that they understand what the property is. But remember, they just took the property over, those institutions. So they have, they don't know the actual. Matter of fact, they put the onus on the buyer to inspect the property, is what happens there. So here's the thing, though, when you hand this to the seller and they do agree to fill it out, you do not advise them or help them filling this form out. This form has gone over several changes through years to try to make it easy and easy and easier, because we don't want agents helping the seller fill this out. We don't. Here's the area where you're an agent. We don't want you to coach. The commission doesn't want you to coach them to fill this out. It's very easy to do. They just need to do it on their own. I drop it off for them. I say, hey, here's a disclosure form. After I do the listing, I'm going to drop this off. I'll pick it up in the next day or two. Fill this out for me if you would, or you can do electronically, send it over to me, and we'll have this prepared for the buyer. It's as simple as that. Right here, it broken me down. Help the seller with the seller's property disclosure or do it for them. Let's take a look at this form. Why is it so hard for them to do it? I don't know. So the dates that they fill it out is the date they put in here. And remember, this form should always be brought current too, as well. So if you have a listing that's been for sale for a few months, and now here comes a buyer with an offer, one of the first things the seller should do in looking at that offer is also look at that seller's property disclosure, see if there's any updates need to be done on it. So it should always reflect the current condition. Okay. No, but you don't have to do it every day, but when a contract, you fill it out in the beginning, and then when something comes in, review it. Does something need to be updated? So the property address, seller goes in there if they know when the year of the property was built. Now take a look at this. We'll show you a few things on here. It's like I think 6 or 7 page form. We're just going to show you a few things on here just to give you a flavor of what it looks like. So for instance, section A is structural conditions. If there is a problem, then there's a yes column to check a box. We used to have a no column. They took that out. That was too confusing. So just a yes column. If there's nothing, you don't check anything. So if there's no problems, you leave it blank. Seller, if there is a problem, then check it and make a comment about it so we understand. Let's get some clarity around it. Okay. So let's go into an area where you could get a test question now. So we skip over to see if they're all labeled A through, I don't know, I think M or something, H. Here's H. H is the source of water supply. Why are we bringing this up here to you? Because one of the things for compliance in your file, you must source the water. You must disclose where the water is coming from, and there's a reasonable expectation for that water to continue to come from that source. So that's a water disclosure. They include the source of water supply in the seller's property disclosure form. So this would, if the seller completely fills this out, this form out, then the source of water requirement for compliance is satisfied. It must be completely filled out, though. So whatever boxes applied must be checked. The water provider information must be completely filled out here. So the name, address, website, phone number. If there's just a name and no address, website, or phone number, that's not completely filled out. Therefore, you have not disclosed. Therefore, now you have to have a separate water disclosure. That's how picky they are about this part. Now, you can always remember that paragraph H in the seller's disclosure is for water, because water is chemically H2O, is it not? 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Take you back to grade school science. H2O, that's how you can remember paragraph H in the seller's property disclosure discloses the supply of water. Okay, but it's got to be completely filled out. All right. Then the seller signs it, the date they signed it. And then when the buyer comes, then we give this to the buyer as a disclosure for the property. Then the buyer signs that they've received it. Okay. Now, if a buyer's buying land, here's something I'm saying, and an old dry cleaning business was formerly located and you are concerned about the property may have hazardous materials in it, then you should encourage your client to get an environment assessment on the property. It's something we, like the last chapter of the National, we cover environmental issues. You can see there's overlap going on. Okay, here's your lead-based paint disclosure. We can always just remember this. Cement this in your brain for your practice from this point on. You're going to need to know this and be careful of this. If a property was permitted, not built, permitted, prior to January 1st, 1978, then the buyer, you got to have this lead-based paint disclosure. Okay, so, and everybody's got to sign this. If it's not signed, then the contract is void. All the conditions are not met, contract is void. So you put the address of the property in here and look at this on this form. Here's where I want you to pay attention. Here's some fines. Remember, it reminded you to be aware of any fines and penalties. They like to ask questions about that. So you know, they know, you know what's going to happen when you do something bad. All right. Something bad would be not filling this out. So what would happen? Failure to comply with federal lead-based paint disclosure laws include treble damages, that's 3 times, attorney fees, cost, and a base penalty up to $11,000, plus adjustment for inflation, which is going on right now. Every time I go to the gas station or go to the grocery store, it's like, what? She ducked that last week. But there's adjustment for that in here. Current penalty is up to $16,000 for each violation. So there's where your test question usually comes in. What's the current penalty? $16,000 for each violation. Don't forget treble damages, attorney's fees, and costs. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the form. Seller discloses if they have knowledge, they check the box and they provide information. Or if they have no knowledge, they check that box and they don't provide any information. They've now disclosed. It's as simple as that. A lot of time, unless seller's been in the property for a long time, most properties that were permitted prior to January 1st, 1978 have transferred ownership several times, right? So current seller may not even has no awareness, and the inside of the home probably been painted over. So even the original paint might not be showing, but underneath it could be. Underneath it very well may be. So be careful of this. If the buyer wants to just disclose to the buyer, there's some risk, especially if they have kids. Say, look, you got kids, you know, lead base, there's no, lead paint's no, you know, that's something to be aware of and what it does. We cover that again, environmental issues, cause mental health issues, retardation, things like that. All right, buyer acknowledges that they've read the lead warning statement, that they've received this booklet. This is a favorite test area. You protect your family from lead in your home. You got to get that booklet. The buyer's agent should be providing that. Now, the buyer, after reviewing all this, they have a choice. They can get an additional risk assessment. Here's the other part of the test question, where they can get 10 days to do that. Or they can waive it. And if they waive it, everybody signs and you just continue on moving forward. Now, that 10-day assessment, that's outside of any kind of agreed inspection items. So there's already been an inspection resolution objection already. We've decided and everything, you know, okay, the sellers agreed to do these things and blah, blah. When this comes up, that's outside of that time period. That's separate. It's a different clock that starts ticking that 10 days if they choose to do a risk assessment. Everybody's got to sign this. Buyers, sellers, both real estate professionals sign licenses. Here's your change of status form. So recall, this is when you're going to have, you're changing your status from agent maybe to transaction broker. You've had that discussion in the employment agreement with your client, and here that event occurs where you'll be changing status. Remember, on the contract, at the very bottom, there's a box that you fill out that just is a change of status. So you do that, and you must provide this form to the side you're changing status to. So I'm the seller's agent, and all of a sudden I'm going to be a transaction broker. I check the box, changing status on the contract at the bottom there, and I provide this form to the seller. So it lets them know there's no ambiguity. about the change of status. Here's your inspection objection. So remember, you put it in your timeline to have the home inspection objection by a certain deadline. So you got to have the property inspected and this form completed and sent to the seller prior to the inspection objection deadline. If you miss that deadline, then no longer can you object over inspection items. So here's the form. You're giving notice that to the seller, some property things are unsatisfactory, and then you describe what is unsatisfactory. And you start numbering. Number 1, roof needs to be replaced. Number 2, drip in the downstairs bathroom. Number 3, HVAC needs to be cleaned and inspected. Whatever they are that you get from your report, from your inspection report, you start listing them on here. And then those are the items that you sent that the seller is going to consider to resolve somehow. Okay. You may or may not attach the report. Remember the report, who pays for that inspection report? The buyer does. So it's the property of the buyer. It's not required for them to share that report. It's up to them if they want to. If they do, then you can include it in this objection. So you check the box if it is. Now notice here, I want you to look at the bottom of this form. Who signs the form? This is unique to this form. The buyer signs this form when they send it over. There's no place for the seller to sign on the inspection objection form. Notice that? There's no place for the seller to sign this. But there's 2 areas for the buyer to sign. The first one is when you're sending it over to the seller. The second one here for the buyer to sign is if the buyer chooses to withdraw those objections. Now, why would they do that? We're in a very competitive market right now. And inspections, when you go under contract, you come to the area when you're doing inspections. This is the area where a lot of contracts, probably about 40% of them, have the potential to fall out because people cannot agree to those inspection items. Another thing that may be happening is seller may be continue getting multiple offers after they go under contract, and they may have received a better offer than the one they just accepted. How can they get out of the current contract and accept a better offer? They can't just arbitrarily do that because they're under contract. One way to do it is wait until the inspection objections come in from the buyer and don't respond to the buyer. Let the resolution deadline come and pass. Contract is now void. And now they can accept the better contract that was sitting in the wings for them. This is one thing that has happened frequent enough. So maybe if a good buyer's agent would be paying attention to the deadline date for resolution and not getting a response from the seller side, they probably would be advising, a good agent would be advising their buyer, hey, there might be another offer on the table they're considering. Would you consider withdrawing? If this house is so that important to you, you might want to consider withdrawing your objections. Now, when they do that, then there is no objection. Then the resolution deadline can come and go for inspection, and the contract stays because there's no objections to resolve, you see. See how that worked? So that's why there's 2 places for the buyer to sign. One that they deliver and one where they withdraw the objections if they so choose. For whatever reason, I just gave you one potential reason why they may withdraw. Sometimes the seller just can't do stuff. Seller's really, in dire straits or a distress sale. So the buyer's asking the seller to do stuff. It's like, no, I can't do nothing. So then, okay, if you still want the house, you got to take it as is, and that buyer has to withdraw those objections. There's all kinds of reasons why. But the important part is you understand the seller does not sign this form. Here's the form that everybody does sign. That's the resolution. So once it comes in, seller decides which items they're going to resolve, and they send this back to the buyer. And if they're okay with what the seller has come up with for a resolution to those objections, then everybody signs this form. And now we've passed that part of the contract. We can continue moving forward. Okay. If they don't sign, then the next series of events that happens is the buyer's broker will execute a notice to terminate, signify that the contract's terminated, and they'll also send in a earnest money release form on the buyer's behalf. Okay. Here's your addendums. So this is if you're going to extend the contract or amend the contract so in a certain way. So if some of these dates need to be changed for whatever reason, you'd use this form to do that. If you're changing a date, you must have this in place prior to the expiration of that date. Otherwise, dates come and gone, it's too late. So you got to do this prior to an expiration date if you're going to change the date or extend the date out. If you're going to amend something, you can put additional amendments and verbiage in here to amend something. Okay. All right, start, explode, went over all that. Here's your source of water. If you do not fill out section H, you remember that because of H2O on the seller's property disclosure form, then you need to fill this out. And it's exactly what you saw in that seller's property disclosure form, only now it's in the form. Where's the water coming from? Got to be completely filled out by your sides. All right, there's some other forms that you can see on the website. We don't cover it here, but you're invited to go take a look at those. The post-occupancy agreement, closing occupancy agreement. That's where it turns into basically a lease situation where the seller turns into the new tenant. And the new owner is now the landlord. So take a look at that. It's very easy to it's very straightforward. The short sale addendum is also something you might want to take a look at. We don't see a whole lot of questions or get reports of questions about this because we're not in that environment so much right now. We may be going into it in the near future, who knows? But right now we're getting a whole lot of questions about it. But it describes that the property is going to be sold for less than what is what is owed on it. That's what a short sale is. The bank is shorting themselves the full amount of what is owed on the property. That's where the term comes from, right? So take a look at the forms online. They're pretty self-explanatory. There's one for the seller listing contract for the seller, and there's one for the actual contract to buy and sell. Again, they were purposely designed and written to be not of legalese language, right? So it should be well understood for you. Foreclosure, of course, is when you haven't paid the mortgage, and now the lien holder is filed a notice of election demand with the public trustee, and you're going to start formal foreclosure proceedings. Remember, equity skimming is a felony in Colorado. What is it? You're collecting rent, not paying a mortgage. A lot of times that happens on foreclosed properties. So that's a felony. Someone's trying to gain as much as they can on the property before they lose it. Well, not a good idea. If you're not paying rent, you're in foreclosure, and you're getting rent on it, and you're not paying your mortgage, that's a felony. And it's called equity skimming. The Colorado Foreclosure Protection Act, there's a certain form in there that lets the seller know the buyer's probably going to be selling it for a profit. The seller can cancel anytime prior to a certain date. Usually it's a foreclosure sale date. And again, that's for distressed properties only. Here's your counter proposal. So you have the offer, and now the seller sees the offer and says, I'm not sure, no, they got to come up in price. I'm not agreeing to that price. Typical counter offer item is price. So in that instance, remember, the seller does not sign the contract to purchase. If the seller signs a contract to purchase, that's stating the seller agrees to everything in there. So that part, if there's a counter proposal, remains unsigned by the seller throughout the transaction. The seller never signs that because there's a counter proposal. Now, remember, a counter proposal in essence is a new contract. Okay, it's a new contract. So our counter proposals change something in the original contract. So here's your counter proposal form. It's kind of like a mini contract to purchase. You've got your descriptions of the property. You've got your dates and deadlines. That's paragraph 3 in the original contract. But now maybe there's some changes to this that you want to make in your counter offer. That can be part of it. Anything can be countered from the original offer, and this is the form to be using that with. So you can change some of those dates and deadlines. Here's you would change the purchase price. So it'd be paragraph 4 in the original contract, paragraph 3 here. That's what this means. 3, original contract, you're changing is paragraph 4. And maybe you change the price and terms in there. Maybe there's something else that needs to be attached in this kind of proposal. So prior to notice that a kind of proposal has been accepted by a buyer, the seller can withdraw, revoke it, and accept a different offer from another buyer. So in real estate, communication is so very important. Let me review a little bit. Remember when we're transferring a deed, the seller signs the deed, but the buyer does not sign. What does the buyer need to do for that transference to happen? The buyer needs to acknowledge and accept it. If the buyer doesn't, then there's no transfer happening. Same thing here, okay? If a counter proposal has been accepted by a buyer prior to that, though, so here's the scenario. Offer comes in and seller writes up a counter proposal, sends it over to the buyer. Buyer's contemplating the counter the seller has sent over to him. Meanwhile, another offer comes in. Seller can entertain and accept that offer. You'll just need to withdraw that counter since the buyer hasn't communicated that they've accepted that counter. So here's where the seller's agent, their job is to communicate to the buyer's side, buyer's agent, we're withdrawing that counter offer. Seller has now accepted another offer. Too late. Once that communication has happened, buyer can sign that counter offer all day long. Nothing's going to happen because they were communicated to, that's been withdrawn. See how that works? Okay. Counter proposal termination original offer creates a new one. Original offer plus the most recent counter creates the binding contract. So this speaks to the negotiation piece in a transaction. You know, where your buyer makes an offer, seller counters. Buyer counters to that, seller counters. I mean, it's a fierce negotiation going back and forth. Does that happen sometimes? Sometimes it does. Here's the challenge though for agents. When it's all said and done and the dust settles, what's the agreement? Is it all the negotiations? Is it the accumulation of all those negotiations strung together? No, it is not. It is the original offer and the most recent counter. That creates the binding contract. If there were things going on in the middle and things even written in certain counters or documents and didn't carry over to the final most recent counter, example, there were discussions about a washer and dryer. Was it going? It was staying, and then it wasn't, and it was going, and it was staying. They couldn't decide because of the price. Finally, they decided, okay, we'll go ahead and put the washer and dryer in, but it didn't show up on the last counter, even though it was written somewhere in the middle. If it doesn't show up on the last counter, it's not part of the agreement. It's the original plus the most current. That's the binding agreement. Making sense? Okay. Here's your closing instructions. Closing instructions are what we send over to the title company to help us close this, to assist us in the closing. Always remember, folks, in Colorado, the Real Estate Commission makes us the responsible party, the broker, for that closing and the accuracy of that closing. That's why you're required to do a closing. You know, when I first got licensed, I had to do an actual entire closing. So you're just going to get pieces of it. I'm going to show you some examples. I'm going to do some math today about prorations and how to do that. But you are responsible for the closing. So when you see questions You'll see some today that I'm going to show you. You see questions about credits and debits and should the broker is going to get credit on something in transaction. Always remember the commission is looking at you as the closing agent, as you is closing this, but you're engaged in the title company. So when you see a broker, and I'll show you examples, don't worry, just planting the seed here for you. When you see a broker in a question about prorations of maybe getting a credit or not getting a credit, and they're involved, the broker / title company. You'll see coming up. This is the form that we send to the title company to do this service for us. It's the instructions to close. We give the information about the property. We check the box that you're going to agree that you're going to do satisfactory title search, examining, and you're going to furnish copies of any exceptions. There's a fee that the title company charges to do the closing for you. You put that in here. It's not going to, they're going to get that fee, so it's disclosed to all parties. And you mark in here how the seller chosen to get their proceeds. Return of earnest money. Here's where you could get a question on this, other than what I've just described about the form. Returning of earnest money. So there's a dispute. Okay, how does the earnest money get back? Following a notice of termination. So now there's a dispute. So the holder is going to release the money as written in the instructions, the mutual instructions. The release of earnest money shall be made within 5 days of the holder's receipt of the written mutual instructions signed by both buyer and seller. Okay, that's return. If there's a dispute, here's where the other question could come up on this form. There's options. Await proceedings, interplead, help them resolve this thing. Provide notice unless the earnest money receives copy of a complaint or claim within 120 days. That's the number, make sure you know, highlight it. Okay, then the earnest money holder is authorized to return it to the buyer. So this is important where you can see some test questions if you're understanding about this form. If you're getting a well, you got to use the forms from the state engineer's office. If there's any withholding, somebody had a question?
Yeah, 120 days for what?
Right here, it's 120 days. Read this here. So they'll return the money to the buyer within 120 days or after 120 days if they don't get something in writing. So after 120 days, they have to return their earnest money back.
I thought it couldn't be more than 60 days.
Sorry, say that again.
I thought that there couldn't be more than 60 days.
This is earnest money. This is not rent. You're confusing lease rent with earnest money. Earnest money is a sales transaction, earnest deposit. Rent is for a lease, and that cannot be held with it no more than 60 days. Two different things.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay. That pretty much wraps up that form. That's the part, though, that on that form you could be tested on 120 days. They can return the money after 120 days. Okay. Now, let's move on. That wraps up what I didn't finish on Tuesday. Now let's get into any other questions on contracts. Stop there. Any questions on contracts? Someone may have. So you're all experts on our contracts, huh? Okay.
Wait, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Ace. Go ahead.
Exclusive right to buy and sell.
Mm-hmm.
Is that one contract or is that two separate contracts?
Two separate contracts. Yeah, I think you missed my Tuesday class. Or if you didn't, go back and look at that. There's two separate contracts that we reviewed. There's the exclusive right for the buy, the buyer side when you represent the buyer. exclusive right to sell when you represent the seller.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Yeah, I
Yep.
had went to the Monday class for that one, but
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yep. 2 separate forms.
And can you, if can someone sells your house and you're the agent for them, can you also be their agent when they buy a house?
Yes, you certainly can. That's not dual agency. That's a separate transaction. So dual agency is when I'm the buyer and the seller's agent in the same transaction. But often we help a seller sell a home and then we help them purchase another one. So we represent them as a seller's agent selling their home. That's one transaction. And when they make a purchase, we represent them as the buyer's agent in another transaction. Perfectly fine.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. Anybody else, any other questions on contracts?
Are you allowed to be in a buy and sell contract with the same person? Like you're helping somebody sell their house, and then can you also be in a second contract with them to help them buy the house if they're already ready to buy a house?
Absolutely. That's what I was just describing for ACE. You're right. Yeah. So you help them sell a home, you represent them as a seller's agent, and then you turn right around and they could be under contract and you turn right around. So you don't have to wait till the house closes, right? That's not dual agency. Remember, dual agency is when you're the agent for the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. But I can be the seller's agent, put them under contract, and then now start showing them homes as representing them as the buyer's agent. That's not dual agency. I'm in 2 separate transactions.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You bet. All right. Thank you for that clarity. All right, let's get into record keeping and trust accounts, section 7. So we're going to be doing, this is the participation part. Like to see your smiling faces so I know you're getting this stuff. and ask questions along the way. This is the participation. So get your calculators out. We're going to be doing some math here and learning how to do remember, we're responsible for the closing. So I'll make sure that you know how to do this. Okay. So first thing is record keeping. Boy, have you seen this before? We have to keep records for 4 years, don't we? How many times have you seen that? You think that's going to be a question on the exam? Yeah. Favorite question. They've got, I don't know, thousands of different questions, but some of them always come up. This one does. You got to keep records for 4 years. Okay. Make sure you know that. Now, for the files, what's compliant on the files? So each side is going to have their copies of certain documents. Shared documents are things like your disclosures, all your disclosures, both sides should have copies of. Contracts, both sides you should have copies of. Any addendums along the way, both sides should have copies of. You follow with me here? Just logic dictates that, right? Anything that both sides have signed. So if there's a document where there's a buyer and seller signature, each side should have a copy of that in their file. Making sense? There is a document that is unique to one side, though, and that is your employment agreements. That's your exclusive right to buy and the exclusive right to sell. The other side doesn't get a copy of that. That stays on the side where it pertains to. So for the seller, that stays in the seller's listing file. For the buyer, the exclusive right to buy form only stays with the buyer's brokerage. Okay. Closing statements, that's all shared. All those things are all shared. Trust accounts. So we're going to talk about trust accounts. What's a trust account? That's when it's a separate account that is established to hold funds on someone else's benefit, for someone else's behalf. Okay, for some future purpose is a trust account. There are some requirements, and this does get technical in here. Make sure you get these. There are guidelines you have to follow. First off, only an independent or employing broker may have a trust account. So right off the bat, you get licensed. Do you need to go out and get a trust account? No, in fact, you're not allowed to. Only the employing broker or an independent. Now, when you first get licensed, you learn you can't be an independent. You have to have at least 2 years experience in before you can become an independent. So all you new agents out there, you won't need to have a trust account, but you need to understand how it works for the exam. All right. First of all, we've got to label the trust account. So like XYZ brokerage, trust accounts can only be opened with banks. You cannot have a credit union trust account. Only banks can have trust account. You can get a trust account with, okay? These accounts do not bear interest. So you cannot make money off of other people's money. That's a misnomer for earnest money. Well, you're holding my earnest money, you're making money off that. I know, no, we're not. That's illegal to do. And if we are, that interest must be then donated to some nonprofit housing thing in Colorado. So it's got to be in the name of the corporation and the designated principal broker. Now, does every real estate brokerage have to have a trust account? No, because Colorado law allows a third party holder to hold the trust funds for the broker, like a title company. So for instance, like Keller Williams' office, we don't have a trust account. We instruct all of our agents to use their title company for the earnest money. So if I represent the seller, I have a relationship with a title company for the title work. And when a contract comes in, I instruct the buyer's agents to make their earnest money out to the title company. And that's where it'll remain until the closing. That's perfectly fine and okay in Colorado. It's part of the law. So you don't have to have a trust account, but a trust account must be available for the money to go. Does it make sense? So either from a third party or from the brokerage. Now, if the brokerage does have a trust account, then the employing broker's got to be able to go in and out of that account. They got to be able to deposit money and withdraw money out of that account without any interference, any impedance, no counter signature. In other words, you know, some accounts you have to have more than one signature to get money out. So that cannot be with a trust account. The employing broker's got to have free access to get in and out of that account without anybody interfering. That's the law. Okay. Now they may be able to assign maybe an administrator on their staff to be able to write checks out of that account, and they don't have to be licensed. That's an administrative duty, right? So a trust account maybe for leases or something. If I had a lot of homes, I'd have administrators, I'd have assistants. Maybe one person would have the ability to write checks out of that trust account. That's okay. And they don't have to be licensed. That's an administrative function. But me as the employing broker, I got to be able to get in and out of there without anybody having to sign for me, even the owner of the company. Okay. Every month we have to reconcile this trust account to protect the integrity of the account. Now we can have somebody, the commission recommends they have audits on your account in order to make sure you're always compliant. And you have a separate outside audit. In fact, the commission, you can invite the commission itself to come in and do an audit. In fact, it's better to invite them to come in and see if you're making sure you're doing everything right, rather than have them show up because of a complaint. And now you're at a little bit different perspective there, aren't you? So yeah, if you're doing property, you're going to go into property management, get yourself all set up, have the commission come out and do an audit for you. They're not there to hurt you at that point. They're there to help you. Hey, you might want to do this, whatever. And they'll help you get going, okay? You cannot commingle funds in this trust account. Do not put your personal funds into a trust account. Here are the different types of accounts. If you so choose to have one, these are the different types of accounts that you could be using and you could be tested on, folks. So first is a sales trust account. This is for any funds connection with a sales transaction. Then you have your management and security deposit trust accounts, and that's for property management, for leases and rental units. Your advanced rental trust account is for short-term rentals, vacation resorts, things of that nature. And then your owners association account is for your HOAs. So get to know those 5 different trust accounts. Those are the type of accounts you could be tested on what they are. Here on the exam, we've seen there's a brokerage. We have as many or as few as the firm needs. So sometimes we get this question, how many accounts are required for them to have? The answer is defined as many as needed to ensure that funds will not be commingled. That's a straight quote from the law. As many as needed to ensure that funds will not be commingled. Okay. Also, a broker who manages less than 7 single-family residential units may deposit rental receipts and secure deposits to disperse money collected in the sales escrow account. That's this top one up here. So let's say you're a pretty strong listing agent. You've got a lot of listings out there, and all of a sudden we get into a market condition where, and this happened during the recession period. All of a sudden, people couldn't sell their houses, and they were like, "Oh, geez, maybe I should rent it out until we get a better market." Can you help me with that, listing agent? Yeah, sure, why not? It's what some people did. So they got into property management that way, really from the back end. That's kind of what happened for some folks during the recession period. So they were able to put monies into the sales account as long as it's less than 7. When you're managing more than 7, now you have to have a separate management or secure deposit account. Okay, so that's on the exam. Okay, delivery of funds to the title company. So this is for earnest money. So I want to make sure there's a distinction. We put both of them here for you. So Ace, you can see this here is right here in front of you. So we got earnest money. When earnest money is to be collected within 72 hours of acceptance of the contract to buy and sell. 72 hours. It's not 3 business days, folks. It's not. And that's one of the multiple choice answers that you'll be given to choose from when that's got to be delivered, the earnest money. It's not 3 business days. It's 72 hours. That's a big difference, isn't it? 72 hours. Okay. So now, but leases, that deposit needs to go within 5 business days. That's different. So Sunday's not a business day. Holiday's not a business day. 5 business days from the date of receipt. And then the return of those deposits must be returned within 30 days. Unless it's written in writing, then it can be 60 days, but it's got to be in writing. Okay. All right. Management of trust of funds by an agent is a requirement unless disclosures be returned made to the tenants that the owner will be holding the deposits. So if the owner's going to be holding the deposits, you got to disclose that. And if you're managing 10 properties, you should use a property management trust account to keep track of rents from the tenants. Earnest money promissory notes must be made out to the listing broker and clearly indicated in the contract to buy and sell. So they got to be made out so it's before the closing date, so it's going to be good funds at closing. You can't make out the earnest money promissory note made out to be the same to be collected on the closing date because you got to have the day before. So that's good funds as of closing date. Buyer is responsible for collection fees, and there is no set limit on those fees. The note goes to court for collection. Remember, seller is responsible for collecting that if it's not paid. If it's not been paid, then the broker needs to notify the seller immediately, and the seller can take action. All right, here's the trust account, how to keep records. So here, folks, I'm going to be presenting this to you. We're presenting this to you from the big picture, from the macro, and then we're going to take it down into the micro. So the first part is you have the journal. We call the jumble journal, and this is the record of what's happening in this trust account. We're going to show you some examples here. So first, we're describing the journal. Holds all the deposits and withdrawals in the account and keeps track of that. Here's a sample. So it's XYZ Realty Company's Sales Trust Journal. Here's what happened. On the 1st, they opened up the account. January 1. They paid $120 into it of their own money to cover bank fees for the year. Wait a minute, Joe, that's their own money. Aren't they commingling? No. The law allows for bank fees to be paid out of your money to operate the trust account, but no more than that can go in there. Okay, of your money. All right, so the money's in there to cover for the year. So here come on January 12th, they do a transaction with Tom, payer. Tom makes a offer for 123 Main Street with a $2,000 earnest deposit that goes into the account. January 12th. The next day, another agent does a transaction with Sue Major for 555 Lincoln Street, Lincoln Lane, right? They get a $2,000 earnest deposit. They go under contract. That goes into the trust account. So at the end of the month, what's the balance on the trust account? $4,120. It's reconciled every month. Following month, we pay the bank fees on the 1st of February. We already had it in there, it's taken out, everything's square. But on the 4th, Tom requests to have this earnest money returned back to him. What happened? Well, it probably went from the 12th to the 4th, typical time frame for an inspection to happen. Probably didn't like the items on there, decided not to go forward. So he terminated the contract and requested a return of his earnest money. Okay, so Tom gets his money back on the 4th, return earnest money funds. Everything's going well for Sue, so those funds remain in there. So at the end of the month, what's in there? $2,110. It's reconciled every month. Okay, is that making sense? Anybody have any questions on this part of it? Is this making sense? Yeah, yeah, okay. Ask now. All right. Let's
That was
move
pretty
on.
self-explanatory.
Good. Good, good, good. All right. You notice they're all in chronological order. Okay. So now here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up what's called ledger cards. So for each one of these events happening, we're going to set up a ledger card to further detail this out. So here's where we're going from the macro down to the micro. So here's the overall ledger, a journal. Don't mix up these terms like I almost did. This is the overall journal. And now we're going to look at the ledger, which is going to identify each individual of these. Let me show you. So here's a ledger. Ledger card for XYZ brokerage realty. So they put the money in, cover the bank fees for the year. At the end of the month, $120 for that. This is just what their participation in the journal is. And at the 1st, they paid that $10. So there's still $110 in there for the remaining months in that year. Now we go down to Tom has a ledger in this journal to show what happened with Tom. So the money came in for $2,000 for 123 Main Street. At the end of the month, there was $2,000 in his ledger. And the 4th, they got that returned. So then we zeroed it out at the end of the month. You see what's happening here? So for everyone, so now Sue is going to have a ledger for hers too as well, and show that the money's still in there. So the journal is an overall big picture, and the ledgers are the individual cases on how they're what's happening. Is that making sense now? between journal and ledger? See the differences? Okay. Questions? Yes, no, maybe? All right. Trusting you guys are getting this. This is tricky stuff. Property manager, this is on the exam, who uses one's own funds to pay another owner's bills, they've committed conversion. This is what conversion is. So the scenario is this: you're managing several properties, and it's the middle of winter, and one of your properties, the furnace goes out. You call up the owner. Hey, your furnace went out. We got to get someone in there to fix the furnace. Your regulator went out. Whatever. Got to go in there and fix it. And the owner says, I don't have the money to do that. You can't leave people out in the cold middle of winter. What can I do to help? I know. I got an account that has some excess funds in it. When can you get that money? When can you get that thing fixed and get the money back to me? Well, I can get it back next month. All right, I'll tell you what. You promise you get back to me next month. I'll take some money out of this other funds I have excess in. I'll float you till you get this thing fixed, and you pay me next month. Okay, we'll get this done so these people have heat in their house. That's a wrong thing to do, folks. That's conversion. Using other people's monies that you have to supply another account. Here's what you've done. You've made that owner's problem your problem. As a property manager, sometimes you got to tell the owner, hey, the furnace went out. Well, geez, I don't have the money to fix it. Geez, you better buy some money to fix it because people can't be without heat. You got more problems coming up if you don't get this thing fixed in the middle of winter. You see? Let them be resourceful. Don't you be resourceful. Okay. That wraps up trust accounts. Questions on trust accounts? No. Okay. Now we're going to go into closing and settlement. Here's where you do some proration, some math. Get your calculators out. This is the participation part. So my expectation is you're going to participate. In other words. All right. Let's do some. I'm going to help you. We're going to have some fun with this, actually. Okay. I want you to get this. This is important for me. I want you to get this. Most closings should be reported to the IRS, including seller's name, social security numbers, and sales price of the property. We've seen that in an exam. All right, let's do some computations. So first off, there's some rules that you need to understand, okay? Differences between a computation that you're going to be getting the question on the national exam versus the Colorado State exam. So in the national portion of the exam, if you're asked a proration court a question, remember, national can cover all different parts of the country. Typically, they're using days in the year, 360-day calendar, where every month has 30 days. Some states, that's how they operate. When I was in Nevada, that's how Nevada operates. Here in Colorado, we use the actual number of days, all 365 of them, in the actual days in the month. There's no rounding, okay? So for the state exam, always keep in mind, we're operating in Colorado, we use every single day. For the national exam, they based a lot of their stuff on a 30-day calendar month, 360-day. Many times they'll point that out in the scenario question. Just be careful of this. Be aware of it. All the other difference, major differences. Another major difference is the closing day. Closing day is on the national is a seller's day. Seller still owns the property on closing day. So when you prorate, you have to be careful. And I'll show you some examples where this could occur. Be careful who owns a property on closing day. In Colorado, buyer owns a property on the day of closing. So when the buyer shows up at the title company, we're already counting that day as the numbers. He owns that property. Taxes, interest, everything starts that day in Colorado. Okay. All right, those are the biggest differences right there. Now, the method of you doing these prorations is going to be with you. Should I get my right thing here? Doing this exercise. Basic steps to calculate a proration, and we're going to be doing this together. First thing is we draw a timeline of the billing period. We draw a line roughly where the closing is going to occur on this timeline. And then we write the date of closing on the right. And then we write seller on the left and the buyer on the right. It looks like this. See this timeline? So we draw a timeline out. We draw a hash mark roughly where the closing is going to occur. And then we mark seller on the left and buyer on the right. This is important for you to get this visual, folks. This is an exercise I'm going to encourage you. In fact, I'm going to tell you, you must do to get these right. This is how I do it. So do it. Okay? This is how you're going to get them right. Now I'm going to go over these with you. All right. Here's some other things you got to know. You do that timeline, and then you determine who owes what. So who's getting credited and who's getting debited. That's the next step you take. Now there's a couple rules to keep in mind. Taxes and insurance are things that are always paid in arrears. What does arrears mean? The tax bill that we get this year is for last year's taxes. Tax bill I get for 2021 is for 2020 taxes. That's paid in, that is what it means to be paying in arrears. Interest, when I make a mortgage payment on the 1st, that's for the interest for the month prior. So August 1st mortgage payment is for July's interest. You see, it's different than paying rent. When you pay rent on a lease on August 1st, it's for the month in front of you, it's for August. That payment is for August. When you make a mortgage payment in the beginning of that month, it's not for the month you're in, it's for the month you just left, the preceding month. That's arrears. Taxes and interest are paid in arrears. That being the case, whenever you get a tax or interest question, the buyer is going to be getting a debit and the seller, it's a credit to the buyer and a debit to the seller. It's always a credit to the buyer and a debit to the seller for a tax or interest question. We'll say it again, because it's going to come up. I want you to remember this. Remember, put it in memory right now. Tax and insurance questions is always going to be a credit to the buyer and a debit to the seller. Okay? Anything that's paid in advance, however, is going to be the opposite. What are things paid in advance? Could be for a propane tank. That's paid in advance. HOA fees are paid in advance. That's always going to be a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. Just the opposite of taxes and insurance. Taxes and interest. Okay? Insurance is something you paid in advance. So that's going to be a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. But taxes and interest are always a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. So you draw a timeline out, you determine who is getting a credit, who's getting a debit, and then you got to calculate the number of days. This is the methodology of doing prorations, folks. Remember, you're responsible for this closing. So you calculate the total number of days, the number of ownership for each side, how many days. Then you divide the entire bill by the number of days in that billing cycle to get a daily rate. We're always trying to get a daily rate, whether it be for interest or whatever it is. We got to get a daily rate of that thing. So you'll see me always funnel down into a daily rate. Again, we're going to do these together. I've got some examples coming up, and these are going to be on our website too. Once we get the daily rate, then we just multiply that by the number of days owned on that particular side. Right, I'm going to show you an example in here. This is a tax question. Okay, so in this tax question, it says here, owner selling their property on March 1st, taxes are $2,000. Okay, so question is, who owes who? So first thing we do is you draw the timeline out. So the timeline represents a year. We put January 1st on one end and then December 31st over here. We remind ourselves this is when the bill arrives. Next year. The closing says it's on March 1st. So we draw a line roughly where we can visually perceive March 1st to be on this timeline. We don't want to put March 1st over here because that's more like November or September or October, right? So put it on the timeline roughly where it should appear. You want to get this visual. Why is that important? Because I'm going to show you when we get through all this, how to do this without making any calculations whatsoever, but you got to do this part correctly to get that visual. So you draw a timeline roughly where that closing occurs. You put, I always just put 3-1 on one where it does on the right-hand side. You can put over here 2 on the last date on this side. Then you write seller on the left, buyer goes on the right of this timeline. Then they went ahead and they calculated, okay, the number of days. There's 365, it's a state question, 365 days. So now we count how many days in this section over here is 59 for the seller. And for the buyer, we counted up 306. Now, how do you count the days? How do you remember how many days in each month, Joe? I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a trick that you're going to do when you take your exam. Okay, first of all, here's how you know how many days in each month. Now, there's a poem up here somewhere. I'm not sure where the poem is. Where is it? Up here somewhere? Maybe. There's a poem in here somewhere. But here's how I remember it. Days. So look at your knuckles. This is something you probably learned in grade school. If not, I'm going to show you right now. Use your knuckles. So every time your finger, my finger lands on a knuckle, that's 31 days. Valleys are 30 days, except for February. We all know February has 28, except for leap year has 29, right? Okay, this is how you know the number of days in each month. January, February, March, April, May, June, July. Watch this, watch this. August, September, October, November, December. Every knuckle has 31 days. Valleys have 30 except for February. Did you catch that? One more time. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Okay? Now, forever you'll know how many months of the year by using your knuckles.
That's a really good trick. I don't remember learning that in grade school.
You didn't learn that in grade school?
No.
Oh my God. Okay. Now you know it. Okay, now here's the thing though. Remember, you're being timed on this exam. So every time I get a question and trying to figure out the months, you're not going to see me count my knuckles every single time. I'm going to show you a trick. Take it to a whiteboard. So you're going to be able to use some scratch paper when you get to your exam. So when you get there, you get your, before you start, hit the button to start your state exam, they'll look, after you finish your national, they'll load up the state and they'll say begin, and you click, right? Don't click yet. Get yourself set up first. So first thing you want to do is get your proration table set up for your months. So you can only do this, only have to do this one time. And on your cheat sheet, here's what you do. You create a cheat. You can do this. This is okay. You go January 31, February 28, March 31, April 30, May 31, June 30, July 31. August, 31. Remember, we went back over again the knuckle. August, September, 30. October, 31. November, 30. And then December, 31. Get on there, Joe. Okay, here we go. See that? Now I can put that on my, I just made a little cheat sheet for me right there to know all the number of days in each month. So now when I have to calculate number of days, all I got to do is refer back. And I don't got to be doing this every single time. Okay? Make sure you do that when you load up before you hit the button to click to start your exam. Because if you hit that button and then you get your, you get all excited. Oh, I forgot to do my cheat sheet now. You're being time and you're doing all this. You're just wasting time. So get this done ahead of time. Okay? Now that you have this, right? Now we go back to our problem and we can figure it out. How do we figure out 59 days? Well, from January, we got January and then 28 days for February. So it's real simple. 31 and 28 is 59. Okay. And then we could just subtract from there 365 from this, get 306. We can do that for easy with that rather than going each month here. Now we have the right number of days and we know which side is which. So now next thing I got to do is find my daily rate. So I take the $2,000 total tax for the year and divide it by 365 days in the year to get a daily rate. And that's going to get me this long number, folks. And here's what I want to make sure you do. Do not round this number. I want you to you should let this number, so on your calculators, whatever, if you need to go into the menu and make sure you don't round it. You want to extend that out to at least 5 places, at least 5. This is more, but at least 5. You want that big number because things could change by $1 or so if you don't. Now you take that times the number of days that you're prorating. So in this case, remember who owes who. You have to debit the seller, credit the buyer. Let me get this visual for you. We're closing here on the 1st of March. This entire tax bill comes due next year. Was the buyer in the property for the entire year? No. They were in majority of the year, but not the entire year. The seller was in part of the year. Seller owes this tax to the buyer, but the bill doesn't come until next year. So therefore, at closing, seller will give a credit to the buyer monies to cover the taxes for the bill that comes next year. Follow me? So that's why there's going to be a credit to the buyer from the seller for the taxes that the seller occupied the property during this time frame. Seller owes those to the buyer. So that's what's going to be the credit is we take 59 times this long number, we get another long number. Now we can round it, 323.29. So it's going to be a debit of 323.29 to the seller and a credit to the buyer, 323.29. The rest of the bill, we don't have to address this at closing, folks, because this taxes will be paid when the bill comes due next year. Is that making sense? You follow me here? Okay. All right. Now, when you do an advance, it's the exact opposite. You take the quarterly fees. This is an HOA. Okay, so this question is for a quarter. So this timeline represents a quarter, not a year now. Represents the quarter because they're paid quarterly, this HOA. And they're paid in advance $112. So the seller already paid it, therefore it's got to be who gets a credit, who gets a debit. Seller gets a credit, you debit the buyer for advance things. So we have our timeline. We draw the closing. This is the same transaction, closing on the 1st. We calculate the days again, seller on the left, buyer on the right. We calculate the days. And we could do this by using our cheat sheet. We get the daily rate, $112, divided by 90 days in a quarter. Gets us a daily rate. The buyer's got to owe, because it's the seller paid it up front. Did the seller in the property the whole time for the first quarter? No, just part of it. Buyer will be in it for this part, but seller already paid it. Therefore, it's got to be a credit to the seller. Buyer's got to pay this and square it at closing. So it's the 31 days that we have to multiply our per daily rate. Now we can round it 38.58. We're going to debit the buyer 38.58, credit the seller 38.58. You see that? Is that making sense? Maybe? Okay. I'm going to take you now to my little PowerPoint here, where we're going to do some more problems like these. And we're going to do them together. Okay. Get some paper out. Here we go. First problem. County's treasurer's tax certificate shows that last year's taxes, the amount of $1,500, have been paid. On the settlement statement dated June 17th, it will show something to the seller in the amount of something, and something else to someone in some other amount. Okay, we're going to do this together now. What's the first thing we need to do? We draw the timeline out. Closing is on June 17th. So hopefully, I want you all to get a piece of paper out and do this with me. Here's our timeline. This is 1/1. This is 12/31. Right? The bill comes here. This is where the bill comes. Right? So we're paying that in arrears. June 17th is the closing. So that's somewhere kind of in the middle, isn't it? 6/17. Okay. We got our timeline. Oops, wrong one. Ooh, I know what we forgot to do though. Hang on. We got to put seller on the left, buyer on the right. So we know the days. Okay. So make sure you're this point. Should be at this point with me. Are we all here together? Devin, we there? Ace, we there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So what's the next part of this equation?
Find the seller's days.
Exact. So first up, we have to ask, who's getting credit? Who's getting a debit? Who can answer that for me?
Debit will go to the buyer. Credit will go to the seller.
Outstanding. Everybody get that?
Yep.
It's a constant. All right, perfect. Debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. First part's perfect. Now we go back to the days. Okay. So you got to figure out the days. So since I have my little cheat sheet over here, look how easy it is for me to do this now. So I got to calculate how many days for the seller. How many days is it going to be? It's going to be January, February, March, April, May, June, and how many days of July? 16 days. What does that add up to be?
167.
167. Is everybody getting that? Is that right? I do believe so. Okay. So if that's the case, then I can just take 365, subtract 167, and now I'm going to get 198 days over.
And it's not 168 because in Colorado, the buyer has the home of the day of closing, right?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for getting that. That's why this 7, I put this on this side for the buyer to help remind us that. Now, if I was doing a calculation on the national part of the exam, they gave me a question using a 360 calendar day, then I would put this on this side of that hash mark to help remind me where that day goes. Okay? See why it's important to have this visual correct? It'll help remind you where the days go. Okay? All right. So far, so good. We got that part. Good job. Now we got to get our per diem. We take $1,500 divided by 365. That's our per diem, same thing as per day. Same thing. Now I have that. We get the days, 167. I can multiply my per diem times the days. Now I can round. And now I can finish my problem. You see that? Any questions on how we did this one? Terrific. Let's do another one. Okay, so this one is a question. We're going to explain some of this to you along the way here. Basically, this is the same closing that's happening. Was a long question. I just broke up into segments for us because that's how you're going to be getting the questions on the exam. They're going to break up into segments for you. So this question, same thing, except now this one is going to be, they're assuming the loan. They're doing it subject to, they're taking over the payments. Okay. So when you're assuming the loan, how do we prorate this? Sounds complicated, but it isn't. I'm going to break it down for you. Let's read it. Buyer's assuming a loan which has a principal balance of $58,777.92. After the June payment, which has been paid. The monthly payments are $683.93 with an interest rate of 9%. The date of closing is June 17th. Seller owes the interest in the amount of X. You show this amount as a debit to someone and a credit to someone else. Okay. So what's the first thing we do? You draw the timeline out. Okay. Now we already did this on the other one, so we can use the same timeline. That helps. We draw our timeline out. Now we have to determine, though, who is going to be getting a debit and who is getting a credit. Can anybody answer that one for me?
Debit's going to go to
Debit.
the seller.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So glad I drove that home. Debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. So glad I drove that home. Okay, good. All right, now we can do the calculation. So we explained that down here. Let's read this explanation, how you can do this. We got to figure out our daily rate. How do you do this when you're assuming a loan? The calculation's a little different when you purchase, when you're getting new money, a purchase money, and we'll have a question like that here, and I'll go over that with you. But right now, we're assuming a loan. So we got to get a daily interest rate. How do we do it? We take our loan principal. Here's a formula here, folks. We take our loan principal times the interest rate to get our annual interest. Okay? Principal times interest gets annual interest. Then we divide that number by 12 to get monthly interest. Then we take that number divided by the actual number of days in the month to get our daily or per diem rate. A little bit of a process. So we start with taking 58,777.92, multiply it by 9%. You get 5,290.012. Then, once we have this number, we divide it by 12. Gets us 440.8344. I haven't rounded yet. That's monthly. Then we divide it by the actual number of months that we're closing in. So we're closing in June. How many days does June have? Well, if we go back to our cheat sheet, we can see June has 30 days. Okay. So we can divide that to get our daily rate. We're finally down to the daily rate. All right. So now, how many days are we dealing with here, though? How many days? This is the tricky part, folks. Okay, this is the tricky part. So I'm going to make an adjustment here now for us. So for this, we actually should be drawing a timeline for June. Why should we draw a timeline for June? So 6/1 here, 6/30 over here. You show you why we're doing this. Okay. The closing is on the 17th, which is about the middle, maybe a little bit more over here. 6/17. You just told me who gets debited, who gets credited, right? Seller over here, buyer over here. When I make my monthly interest, my monthly payment, the interest for June will be paid in July. First, that'll pay the interest for this month. With me so far? They said that the June payment's been made. The June payment covered what? Anybody?
May.
May's interest. Perfect. June payment covered May's interest. So who's going to pay July 1st payment? Buyer. So see, now I had to do this other timeline. I have to figure out, was buyer in the property when they make the payment in July for the whole month of June? No. So how many days does seller owe buyer for June? 16 days. You see that? Is that making sense? So now I want to go back. My problem here. That's what I'm prorating, those 16 days times my per diem Gets me to 235.11. Questions on how this works?
Do you have another interest problem?
Yes, I do.
'Cause this one's hard for me.
Okay, where are you? Did you get lost?
So, okay, let me try not to look at the red. The buyer,
I'll help you.
okay.
I'll help you.
The buyer is assuming a loan with the principal balance of $58 after the June payment, which has been paid. So that's in advance. The monthly payments are $683. The
Okay,
interest
stop.
rate in that.
Stop right there, Ace. You said that's in advance. Remember, interest is always paid in arrears.
Okay, interest is always paid in arrears. It's not in advance. June 17th is the closing. So you start off with $58.
This is 58,777.92. It should be a comma there.
Oh, you times that by 0.09. And
That gets my annual interest for the
right.
year. Okay. Keep going.
And then
Keep going. You're doing good. Keep going. Look at the formula. You got your annual interest.
But okay, that's what I was right. Okay, so then you take the annual interest, you divide it by 12
To get the monthly.
to get the monthly interest. And then you take that and you times it by the number of days.
You divide it. You gotta take this. You gotta get further down. We're not small enough yet. We gotta get a daily rate. Your goal is always to get a daily rate. Always.
So divide the monthly interest by the actual number of days.
Right.
So yeah, you have to get the number of days. June has 30 days. Don't round the days.
Not yet. Don't round yet. Now I got to calculate. Now that I have my daily rate, what do I do next?
You times it by the amount of days to
And you need that. That's why you need this timeline, right?
the seller.
Right. And you find this out using this timeline. See that?
Because the seller is getting credited.
Who's getting credit?
The buyer.
When is this? Right, because when he makes July 1st payment, that's for June's interest. But you see, look at the seller, the buyer wasn't in the property for all of June. The seller was in the property for some of June, almost half, a little more than half.
So the buyer gets credited.
Buyers got to get credit for the amount of money that when they make July's first payment for June's interest of the time they were not in the property. The
So
seller
the buyer gets credited for a tax bill too, right?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Buyer gets credited for taxes and for interest. Okay. All right. We'll do another one. We're going to do some more.
How many math questions on the test?
All right. That's a great question. That's great. Depends on what test you get. You could potentially get a test with maybe one or two. You could potentially get a test with half a dozen of them. So we want you to be prepared.
I think
How
I can
many
see where
points
Ace
for
got a
each
little
question?
confused.
Okay, go ahead.
One or two.
Because it was saying that the June payment has already been made, but we should keep in mind that the June payment technically reflects for May, right?
Exactly. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, there's a couple of
Okay.
confusing things in this, and I want to point it out to you because in your scenario questions, you're going to be making statements that might take your mind and throw it off. You're exactly right, Anthony. Making a statement saying that the June payment has been paid makes your mind think, oh, the month of June is paid. Wrong. Because when you make a June payment, that's for May's interest,
Thank you, Anthony. That makes more sense.
right?
Yeah,
May's
I got confused too. So I was like, wait a second. But then you got to keep in mind, it's always for the month prior.
It's always for the month prior. Good point. Great catch there. Here's something else. To do this problem, was it important for us to know 683.93 was a monthly payment?
No.
Not at all. So here you see there could be extra information in questions that you don't need to answer the question. So be careful of that when you're reading the question. Here's the practice what you want to do. You want to read the question in its entirety, get to what they're asking about, and then go back and use only the information you need to answer the question. So in this instance, they gave us everything, including the monthly payment. But when we get to the question, the questions are, who's getting debited, who's getting credited, and what's the amount? Well, I don't need to know 683.93 as a monthly payment to answer those. You follow me now? Okay. All right, let's do the next one. Lender instructed the seller not to mail the June mortgage payment in the amount of $683.93 to ensure that the payment was actually collected, because it could get lost in the mail, didn't clear because the bank you get a check, who knows. The lender further instructed the broker to collect the payment instead. So the principal balance of $58,777.92 assumes that the instructions were followed. Who's getting debited? Who's getting credited for what amount?
The seller is getting debited and the broker is getting credited.
Good job. For what amount?
It's a good question.
That was great. A lot of people get this one wrong right here. Come on, you get the next one. You got it. Ace, come on, you're on a roll. Do this. What's the amount? Look at the question.
Okay. All right. Okay. The lender instructed the seller not to mail the June mortgage payment. $683.
Yeah, it's almost like, can it be that easy? Can it really be? And yeah, you're basically just spitting out what the question just told you, right?
Wow.
All right. Here's the thing I want to point out to you here. Credit the broker for the June. Does that mean you're going to be responsible for making that payment then to the collecting and sending it over there? So technically speaking, where the commission views a closing, yes, you're responsible for that. Here's what's in reality happening in real time. You're going to the title company and you've already engaged the title company to facilitate this closing for you. So the title company will be collecting that and sending it up to the mortgage company. In reality, okay, in real world. But for the exam, you got to understand when they refer to broker as getting a credit or the broker at the closing getting something or debiting something, it's broker / title company kind of thing. Think that way. Remember, we're engaging the title company to do this, but we're responsible. Okay, is that making sense? Okay. All right. Let's do another one. HOA question. Okay, HOA fees are amount of $120 paid by the seller. Closing is October 10th. debiting some monies to somebody, crediting other monies to somebody else. Who's going to do this one? Charlene, you do this one. Come on.
Got this.
Ace got it.
Ace got it?
Yeah, Ace got it. Let Ace do it. I think different.
I think you debit the buyer and credit the seller
Why?
because the HOA payments, that's like the seller already paid stuff in
Perfect.
advance. So you
Perfect.
credit the
Perfect.
seller
Perfect.
and
Perfect.
debit the buyer.
Perfect. Perfect. Debit to the seller, credit to the seller, debit to the buyer. Perfect. Okay, good. Now, let's do the amount. So what do? We have
Make
to
the
draw
timeline.
a timeline. Closing is October 10th. And this is for the October fees, for it's a monthly fee, $120. Okay. So let me get rid of some of this stuff in here. Okay. We draw our timeline out. This is for the month of October. October has 31 days. So 10-1 goes over here. 10-31 goes over here. And then the closing is, when was the closing again? Closing is on the 10th, $120. Okay, so we're on the 10th is kind of like over here, right? So this is the 10th, 10-10. All right, seller, buyer. Okay, and we're $120. So how many days we dealing with here? Well, we got 9 days over here, right? And if I take 31 minus 9, it gets me 22 over here. Now, here I'm going to show you a common mistake, but people do. Make sure you don't do this. Sometimes people will do this. Oh, there's 31 days in the month. And we're closing on the 10th. So 10 days. So it's 21 days. You see the mistake there? What happened? It should be 22. Why? Because don't ever forget to count this day as buyer owns the property. So that's why you figure out the seller's days. Then you just subtract the total days by that, and you'll always get the correct answer here. You see this? If you do this, you're going to get an incorrect answer. You see the different mistake sometimes people make? So I'm pointing it out to you in case you do this, you don't do it. Don't do that. Okay, so 22 days is what I'm dealing with. Now we have 120 is the amount. So I got to take 120. What do I do to get my daily amount? I divide it by
31.
31. Okay. I get 3.8710. Now I can figure out the days, 22. So the question now remains, you said, Ace, that the credit is going to the seller and a debit to the buyer.
Yeah.
What's the amount?
You do the daily rate times 22. Because debit and credit is going to be the same.
Outstanding. Good job, man. Does everybody else understand that part of it? Cody, you getting it? Tevin, you getting it? Charlene, yeah?
Yeah.
Got it.
Somewhat. I'll figure it out.
Ask now, Charlene. This is the time to ask. You got me. You got me here. Now's the time to ask.
No, I'll figure it out. Thank you.
All right.
But
So here's
what
our
helped me-
answer.
Sorry.
8516 is our answer on this
Can I say one thing?
one. Yep.
What helped me, Charlene, is like credit and buy and debit's always going to be the same. And so like you figure out the debit and the credit will be the same.
Yeah, that's a great observation. It's going to help you when I show you the key to the universe. You're going to love it. Okay, here's another one. Closing date October 9th. So here's an assumption. We're going to do another assumption. You asked for another assumption. Here it is. Buyer's assuming seller's present loan. October payment has been paid by the seller. Remaining principal balance is $84,435.76. Interest rate of 8.5% per annum. Interest is collected monthly in arrears. First question is, who's getting a debit? Who's getting a credit? I'm hearing crickets. Who's getting a debit? Who's getting a credit?
I don't want to be wrong, but
It's okay. It's okay to be wrong here. It's just not okay to be wrong on the exam. This is where it's okay to be wrong.
debit the buyer, credit the seller.
Okay, let's think about it. When we
Yeah,
answer
because
this.
the
Credit
seller,
the debt. Mhm.
Go ahead, Charlene. Go ahead, Charlene.
So it says it right there in the thing. The seller present the loan. So you credit the buyer, right? Is it
Credit the
the
buyer
opposite?
because why? Because interest is paid in arrears.
Uh,
Interest and taxes, you're always going to credit the buyer and debit the seller.
yeah, I read it differently. I'm different. So
All
I
right,
looked
as
at
long as you
I
get there.
read yeah, you have to read the paragraph because sometimes the words, that's how I look at stuff. That's how I got the answer.
Okay, but
Because it says it right there. The buyers assume the seller present the loan.
okay,
So that's how I got the debit was the buyer. And it's let me see. Well, that's how I look at it. Everybody
okay.
thinks
So
different.
so
I put stuff out
so
there.
what I want to help you though, Charlene, is to always remember
Mhm.
those two items are constant on this exam. When you're doing prorations, they're constant. Whenever you're dealing with an interest question on a credit and debit for a mortgage loan, it's always going to be a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. Same thing with taxes, because the bill comes the following year or the following month. Therefore, in the month or the year that you're closing, the buyer needs to get a credit at the closing table for the bill that's going to occur in the future. Does that make a little more sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
reversed. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Okay. Good. 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 All right. So let's do this one here. First, we're going to be debit the seller and we credit the buyer. We just established that. Okay. What's the next thing we need to do?
make a timeline.
Make a timeline. Good job. October 9th is the closing. Where's my eraser at? There it is. Okay. You get your timeline out. And October 10th is the closing. Okay. So now we got to figure. So as a timeline, when you draw the timeline out, by the way, let me just give you another shortcut because I'm trying to get you down to the shortest possible space. So we're dealing with October, right? So you don't have to do the timeline for the entire year. We could go right to October now. So we're closing in October. So this is 10/1. This is 10/31. And we're closing on the 10th, which is up here. 10/10.
Why are you doing just a month?
Why am I doing just a month? Because, or maybe I should be doing more than a month. Hang on, let me look at this again. So, no, I need to do the, okay, so because I'm doing the interest. Interest is collected for that particular month. Is collected in arrears. That's what I'm prorating, is the interest for that month. That's why I'm doing just a month. If I was doing taxes, I would do it for the whole year. But interest is only speaking to, I'm only have to calculate the proration of interest of a month's time frame. So that's why my time frame I'm drawing is for a month's time frame. Does that make sense?
You say that again?
Okay, yeah. So if I was doing a tax question, I'd do it for the entire year because I got to calculate all the days in that year. But for an interest question, I'm only concerned with a particular month of interest. So therefore, my timeline is going to just represent a month.
So
Makes sense,
interest
'cause-
is always monthly?
Interest is monthly, correct?
Okay.
Were you saying, Anthony?
No, he said it's spot on because interest is usually paid monthly as opposed to taxes. Taxes are for the year.
Right. So we want to represent, the timeline should represent for us, it's a tool for us to represent the what we're trying to calculate. And for interest, we're trying to calculate the number of days in a month for the interest because interest is monthly.
Okay, and I'm gonna be honest, I really don't like get the interest stuff, but from what I understand, tell me if this is right, like basically in the scope of things, the buyer needs to be able to pay the interest of stuff. And if they buy it in the middle of a month, the seller needs to give them money to help them pay for the whole month.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Right. So whatever month you're in, and you're dealing with interest.
It's like taxes.
Yeah, because you see the interest paid when you're making a payment here on the 1st of October, that is for September's interest.
Oh.
You see, light went on, didn't it?
So October is going to be for.
So if we're closing right here in the middle of the month, right? This entire payment isn't going to be paid until 11/1 for this interest, for October's interest.
Brings us back to the question from before, Ace. Like, remember saying he was saying that the June payment was already made, but it was for the month prior for May because everything's
Right.
paid in arrears.
Oh, and arrears is at the end of the month.
Arrears is before you. So So the bill I get for taxes for 2021 is for 2020 taxes. The payment I make on October 1st is for September's interest. The payment I make on November's 1st is for October's interest.
So this is just like taxes, except in a month.
Perfect.
Like
Perfect. Exactly.
October is all of September, but they weren't there for October, so the seller has to give them the amount that they weren't in there, so they have the whole. And that's why you credit the buyer and debit the seller. The same
Ding,
thing for
ding,
the
ding, ding.
taxes.
Man, you got it now. Now you got it. Now you got it. Now you got it. Perfect. Okay. All right. Now let's go back to our problem. So that's why we got to figure the days in here. Again, we got our timeline to help us figure those days, right? So we know it's going to be 9, right? Here for the, again, seller goes over here, buyer goes over here. So we take 31 and that's back to our 22, right? So,
I think on the equation, it said the closing date was the 9th of October.
oh, did it? Did I make
Yeah,
a mistake
I
there?
think so, yeah.
Oh, you're right. Absolutely right. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Let me see where my eraser at. Thank you for catching that. All right. Now it's a little bit different. So now we got 8 days over here and 23 over here. Okay. All right. So what do we do next? Anybody remember the formula?
Oh,
Do you multiply the loan by the interest?
yeah.
Okay. That gets your annual interest. What do you do next?
Divide by 12?
Perfect. What do you do next?
Divide by 31?
Outstanding.
Okay. Okay. I'm not gonna look at the red. So the first thing you do is you times 8.5% by 84,000,
Yep.
and then that's
That's
your annual interest amount. So annual is a year. So then you divide that by 12.
Oh, you got it.
And then now you have a monthly. So then you divide that monthly by the month that you're in, which is 31. And then you times that by the person you're debiting, which is the seller, which is 8.
Right.
Oh, that makes much more sense when you think about it that way.
By George, I think you got it. Or by Ace, you got it.
Can I copy this down real quick?
Yeah, and you can get these on our website too.
Oh, okay, never mind. I got it down then.
Yeah, they're on our website too. Okay. Good job. Perfect. All right. Sewer charges. I'm doing on time. Doing good. Sewer charges. $15 per month, paid in advance on a quarterly basis. Seller has paid the 4th quarter bill in the amount of $45. Closing date is November 5th. Who's getting a debit? Who's getting a credit?
You debit the buyer, credit the seller.
Right, because they're paid in advance. Good job.
Yeah.
Good job. Okay. So how do we do this one? What do we do next?
Sewer charge at $15 per month in advance. The seller has paid the fourth quarter bill in the amount of $45. Closing date is 5th.
Okay, this is a little tricky. Let me show you how this one's done. So we got to compute a daily charge. Where do you get the daily charge from? From the $15 per month. So you compute the daily charge. That's the number of days in November. It's 0.5. Now, follow me on this, folks. The seller paid from October through December. He paid in advance. That's the fourth quarter. So you got to understand what a quarter is, right? So there's 4 quarters. Each quarter has 3 months in the year. The fourth quarter is October, November, December. All right, so you got to figure the seller paid all those days, but the closing, the seller was in the property all the way through November, up until November 5th. So he enjoyed the use of those sewer charges for October and 4 days of November that he paid for. But he's not going to enjoy the monies that he of the time that from November 5th through the end of December. Are you with me? You follow me here? So we got to figure how many days. So it's November is going to be 26 days in November. That's the time from the 5th through the end of November is 26 days. Plus, it says in your question here that it's $15 per month. So we prorate November, but we don't have to prorate December because it says in our question 15 per month. We just add $15 for December. So we get our per diem is 50 cents for 26 days for November is $13 plus 15 is $28. Questions? Come on, this is complex. You all got to be looking at this going, how did he get there? Come on, somebody ask a question.
Why do you not include October?
Why do I not include October? Because closing, this is a prepaid amount. And we already said the seller's going to get a credit for the time they didn't use for the monies they paid for.
Oh, because they already paid for it.
Correct.
So they didn't get that money back.
Correct.
Credited from the buyer who is using that amount.
Correct.
They're going to give them that money back. And they did use October.
Yes.
So they're not going to pay him for October, but they're going to pay him for most of the month of November that they didn't use and they used, and all of December, which they used and the seller didn't use. So
Right.
they'll be debited that and credited to the seller.
So it's going to be a debit of 28 to the buyer and a credit 28 to the seller.
And you get there by getting the daily charge and then 26 times the daily charge plus December.
Right.
So the daily charge.
Is this making sense, Cody? Tevin? You have any questions on this one?
No, I got it.
Yeah, everything's good.
Okay. Charlene, how we doing? You're gonna tell me I'm gonna get it myself. I know, but how we do it? Can I help you
It's
with
all,
it?
no, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right.
I'll figure it out.
Anthony, we good?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just rereading everything just to make sure I got it, but it all makes sense.
Okay,
Okay. I think I understand.
perfect. Here we go. Sale closed March 13th. This is a lease back question. The seller will rent back the premise at $1,200 per month, payable in advance. Collect prorated March rent by debiting something to somebody and crediting something else to somebody else. Who's getting a debit? Who's getting a credit?
The buyer's getting debited and the seller's getting credited.
What's your reasoning behind that?
Because it's paid in advance.
Who's paying advance?
The seller.
Seller's going to be paying in advance to who? From who? The buyer. Right?
Yeah.
So I know that you're thinking, you just said advance means it's going to be a debit to the seller, credit to the buyer, but you got to look at this question though. Tevin, look at this question. What's happening? On a seller rent back, the roles reverse. Seller is now a tenant. Seller is, and the buyer is now the owner of the property.
So am I debiting the seller then?
Yes, because now the seller is no longer an owner, he's a renter.
Okay.
And rent is always paid in advance, but who is he paying it to?
Yeah.
The new owner, the buyer.
Okay.
See
Cool.
You see that now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you got to be really careful about some of these. So in this case, the roles reversed. That's why it's ending up that
Okay.
I don't get it. I'm lost.
way. Okay, so typically I'm always telling you, anything paid in advance, the rule was, right? Anything paid in advance is going to be a credit to the seller and a debit to the buyer. However, this is what's happening in this scenario. We have a closing happening on March 3rd, 13th, but the owner of the property, the seller, is not moving out. They're going to stay in the property. Maybe they have a house that they're trying to build or something. So they're going to stay in the property, and they've agreed to pay the buyer $1,200 a month rent for the property they just sold. So buyer now after close on the 13th, buyer is a new owner of the property, and the seller turns into a renter.
Oh. So then you would debit the seller.
That's why you're debiting the seller, because his role is no longer as seller. His role now is tenant.
Okay.
So he's paying money out of his own pocket to rent the place that he just
Correct.
sold. Gotcha.
Correct.
So it's a credit to the buyer. Got it. Or
Correct.
the buyer, now the new owner.
Correct. Correct. Okay, making sense? Now we got to figure out how we calculate this, right? So now we understand why. Now we got to calculate. So here's how we calculate. We take prorated March rent. Okay, here's what we do. We take $1,200 divided by 31. That's the days in March to get our daily rate. How many days? So our timeline should represent what? March. Because we're just dealing with the days in March now. So in March, what's the rent? Since we're closing on the 13th, who owns the property on the 13th? This is where a common mistake is made on this question.
The buyer.
Buyer owns a property, so we got to make sure we don't not count that day. We have to count that day. So that's why there's 19 days. Here again, if we just went 31 minus 13, we get 18 days. It's not enough. We have to make sure we count the 13th as one of the days. This is what the seller owes rent for because the buyer owns a property on the 13th. So now that we have the days, we have our per diem, we just multiply, and then now we have the amount. 735.48. Okay? That making sense?
So you get the daily rate, which is 1,200 divided by 31. Then see how many days that the seller owes for, times that daily rate by how much the seller owns for. So 1,200 divided by 31. Close on the 13th, 19 days. Daily rate times the day he owes is your answer.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, this next question is a typical transaction when you have a purchase money mortgage. Okay, this is the calculation. If someone was like most of our transactions, people going out and getting a loan to buy a property. This is the calculation for this in this question. So I'm going to teach you this now. The question comes in the form of, again, this is of a seller that is carrying back a note on a second mortgage. How does this occur? Well, it occurs when, for instance, if someone's going to be taking over someone's payments, and now when they're taking over someone's payments, that means what are we doing with the equity in the property? So you're just taking over the payments, but I got like 50,000 in equity in my property. How you paying me that? Right? So it looks like this, folks. I just want to make sure you don't get confused why you're doing a carryback here. It looks like this. Let me use these numbers. Okay, 30,000. Okay, so let's say, for instance, they're selling the property for $350,000 is the sales price. Okay, I'm giving the rest of this scenario so you can see the picture here. So here's the sales price, $350,000. Okay, I have a loan. My loan is for $300,000. I have a loan for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you take over the payments of my loan. I'm selling my house. You're going to take over these payments of $300,000. So that leaves $50,000 equity that you have to buy me out, buyer. Do you have $50,000 cash? Buyer says, nope. I have $20,000 cash that I'll give you. Will you take the other $30,000 and let me pay you in monthly payments over time? This is called a seller, and the seller agrees, it's called a seller carryback. So they're going to assume this is the first mortgage. And now this is going to be a second mortgage that they'll make payments on to the seller. You following the scenario? Any questions on this part? Is it making sense? I'm hearing crickets again. Somebody say yes or no.
Yes.
Got it.
Okay. All right. Now let's do this. Okay. So what do we do? It says here, Sellers carry back a new second trustee amount of $30,000 at 10% per annum. Interest collected monthly in arrears. Closing takes place February 23rd. First payment is due April 1st. Collect interest due at closing. Debiting something to somebody and crediting something to somebody else.
Debit the buyer and credit the seller.
Close.
What?
Ace, you had this correct. You are the first ones to have this correct in a long time on a different problem. Credit the seller. We're debiting the buyer, crediting the seller.
Isn't that what I said?
Is that what you said? I thought you said it backwards. Maybe I heard it wrong.
No,
Did you
you
say
credit
that?
the seller because the seller is the one giving the.
Okay.
You're paying
all right.
the seller.
All right. I take it back. You got it right there. You got that concept right. Good job. Okay. Good job. Sorry about that. I heard it wrong when you said it for some reason. All right. Okay. Now here's the formula for this, though. The formula is different than an assumption. So the formula when you're doing a new loan, and this is in essence a new loan, and the seller doesn't carry back, it's the same kind of calculation if you're getting a purchase money mortgage from a lender, bringing new money into the transaction. So here's a formula. You take the principal times the interest to get the annual interest. Okay, so far that's the same, but here's where the difference lies. Now we take that annual interest and immediately divide it by 365 to get the daily rate. So we don't go by 12 and then divide by the number of days in the month like we did on an assumption. We immediately get to the daily rate by dividing by 365 once we get our annual interest. Okay. Now we take that daily rate times the actual number of days in that monthly period. So closing is February 23rd. I'm going to draw this timeline out for you to illustrate this for you. February 23rd. You got your timeline out. It represents what? February. 2/1, 2/28. And we're closing where? Way over here on the 23rd. Buyer, seller. Oops, wrong. Seller, buyer. I did it backwards. Joe, don't confuse people for crying out loud. Seller, buyer. Okay. So April 1st payment, we got March. And here's April. Okay. On the timelines. Remember, when I make April 1st payment, what month is that going to be covering?
March.
March. Closing is happening the 23rd. How many days do I have to prorate?
$37.
Why? Are you saying 37?
It's 31 plus 6.
Where's 31 coming from?
March.
So why are we adding March days in here?
Because that's what you pay for April.
But
So 4.
yeah, there you go. Good job, Charlene. Here's what's going on. Actually, no, it's going to be 5, Charlene. You got to count this day here. You got to count. Yeah, you went the opposite way. You got to count this day here. So here's
Like
what we're
that.
doing, folks. Yeah, so we got to count the 23rd,
yeah.
the 24th,
Yeah.
the 25th, 26th, and 28th. So there's 5 days here.
Yeah.
Isn't that 6 days?
6, sorry, 6.
6.
You're right.
24.
6 days here because this is buyer's day. Okay.
So why
I thought it was,
do you not add that to March?
Because when I make April 1st payment, that's for the interest for all of March. So I have to be concerned with March at closing. That's going to show up when that payment of April is made.
Oh. So that's like information you didn't need?
Kinda. And here's what, when you purchase a house and you have a closing day, if you purchase a house and you close today, your first payment wouldn't be due until when? September 1st or October 1st? October 1st. Because when you make, it feels like you're skipping a month, but you're not. Remember, interest is paid in arrears. So it looks like they're skipping March, but we're not. Because when I make that payment in April, that's going to cover March's interest. So therefore, at closing, I'm just concerned with this here to get me to the end of the month. Any type of new purchase, when we're calculating it, we need to get the interest to the end of the month that we're in. The following month's interest will be paid when that first payment is made on the next month. Are you with me on this? Is it making sense? That's why we're not adding the days for March, because when I make the April payment again, that'll cover the interest in here.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So to do this question, then, all I need to do is 30,000 times 10% divided by 365, unless in the question we're told that we're working with a 360-day month. Otherwise, 365 gets my daily rate. How much interest? 6 days. So all I got to collect is $49.32. Did I confuse you somewhere, Charlene?
So it's the day. So it's the February 22nd. That's where you hit the day before. How you get 6 days?
6 days? Good
Yeah.
question. Okay. Here's all I got to get 6 days. See, if I just go 28 days in February minus 23, that gets me 5. The problem with this, Charlene, is I'm not counting the 23rd as one of the days. So if I do this, I got to correct myself and add 1 to get me the day of closing. Okay. So it's not 5 because you didn't count the 23rd as one of the days. You're on mute. You unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Right. So it's the 22nd day, correct? You got to do the
Sorry,
day
say-
before. to get
What?
the
Say that again.
Okay, so you said the 23rd.
Is
So you
closing.
have to do correct. So you have to do it on the 22nd to get the 6 days. So it's only 28 days, right? So
Right.
20, 23rd, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, my birthday February 23rd. See, I think both sides I think different from,
You got to
That's
count
how
that day as one of the days the buyer owns the property.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. It's the way it's worded.
So that's why you can't just go 28 minus 23 to get 5, because you're not
No.
taking into account the actual day of closing.
Yeah, it have to be the day before, basically.
If you want to do it that way, however, I kind of add one. If you want to do it this
Yeah,
way, just
still
add
one.
one to your problem.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just always
Thank
add
you.
one so you get the correct, because you're missing the day here for this math problem.
Correct. So basically, you got an extra day. They just
Yes.
added an extra day. Yeah. So the 22nd, I would never do the 23rd, even though it's stated the 23rd. You want to give yourself that extra day. So that's what they're doing, a grace period.
No, it's not a grace period. It's not a grace
You don't
period. It's
think
the way
so?
we have to calculate the days in order to get the right answer. Because if we count, if we just go 28 minus 23, we're not counting the 23rd.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. I know what they're doing. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on this, how this works? Making sense now?
Yeah, I got it.
All right. Okay. This is another interesting existing loan assumption. Closing date is August 29th. Let's see how we do on time. We can do another one of these. Principal balance is 86,394.75, interest rate of 9%. Borrowers will be charged a September 1st payment. Prorate the interest. Okay, so again, we're going to take the interest times the principal times the interest. You get the annual interest. And we take that divided by 12 to get the monthly interest. And we take that divided by 31 to get the daily interest. So now we got to figure how many days the seller's going to owe. So it's going to be 28 days. Why? Closing date is the 29th. The 29th is buyer's day. Remember, the seller owes because interest is paid, because when he makes that August 1st payment, that was for July's interest. So when this buyer's making a September 1st payment, they're paying for all of August, but they weren't in there for all of August. They're only there as of the 29th. So the 8 days they weren't in there, that's the amount they're going to have to get credit. So when they make that September 1st payment, they already have the monies in their pocket to compensate for all of August they will be responsible to pay for. Okay? Questions? Starting to make sense a little bit?
It's just like rent. So say you move in the middle of the month, and then they do, so that's what they calculate the interest of how much you really owe. So you only owe for 15 days.
Okay,
the only
thing I'm concerned about, Charlene, here's the only thing I'm concerned about your answer, is that it's not like rent at all.
No.
Rent is paid in advance. Interest is paid in arrears. You got to make sure you get that in your mind correct. Because if you think it's just like rent, you're going to make a mistake. When I make a rent payment on August 1st, that's for August. When I make a mortgage payment on August 1st, that's for July.
Yeah. So just like say I'm moving next month on the 1st. No, on the 15th. They only could calculate up to the, you see what I'm saying? The interest from the previous month for 15 days. They can't charge you for the total rent. Is it like that? That's what you're stating?
Yeah. So again, when I'm making this statement here, the buyers will be charged a September 1st payment in this question.
Correct.
That's for not September.
Right.
That's for all of August.
Correct.
But was the buyer in the property for all of August? Not either. The buyer was only in the property from the 29th on. since they're getting the bill of all of August for September 1st, that's why the seller needs to pay a credit for the time that they were in the property that the buyer was not in.
Right.
Okay. Okay. It's complex. I know it is. That's why I'm just trying to really kind of drill it home for you guys. All right.
Yes.
Okay, that's another first mortgage. I'll let you guys do that on. You can do this on your own and catch all these things. Basically, I want to get to another one here that's going to be a little bit challenged. That's coming up. I got a few more things to cover. So this one is the first brand new mortgage, like we usually do in our transactions, for $150,000. So we take $150,000 times the interest rate to get the annual interest. Then we take that. Now, in this particular question, it's telling us that the lender is using a 360-day calendar year. So therefore, we have to oblige. And we have to say, okay, now I take my annual interest divided by 360 to get my daily interest. Now, once I have that, now I got my daily interest. Now I compute my days. Whenever you compute the days, even if the question says we're using a 360-day calendar year, 30 days in each month, we still calculate the actual number of days in the month we're closing. So since we're closing in July, there is 31 days. I take my per diem, multiply it by the number of days that we have to collect from the buyer, which is to the end of that month that we're in. So that's the closing on the July 20th. So it's the 20th through the 31st. That's 12 days times my per diem gets me to 425. That's the interest we'll collect at closing for the interest of July. When they make that payment in September, that'll pay for August interest. Okay? Okay. I wanted to get to this one. I wanted to get to. All right. So buyer's assuming an insurance premium now. Insurance is typically paid in advance, their annual premiums. So you pay for the whole year in advance on insurance, homeowners insurance. So in this question, the buyer is going to assume the loan and they're assuming the insurance. So we're just focused on the insurance part here. The premium is $350. Now it's paid on July 22nd. Closing is November 14th. So first thing, who's getting a credit, who's getting a debit?
Credit to the seller, debit to the buyer.
Yes, because the seller paid it in advance. Good job. Good job. What's the amount we're going to, now, when we do the amount, okay, we're going to take 350 divided by what? For our daily rate. What am I dividing 350 by?
30.
Okay, so insurance is always an annual premium. It goes for 12 months.
The 12.
So we could divide it, 350 is the annual premium. I want to get my daily rate. I can just take 350 and divide it by 365 right away. Okay, to get my daily rate. Because it's not telling me I'm using a 360-day calendar year. So therefore, I'm going to go with state Colorado laws, which are 365 days. So I can take 350 divided by 365 to get my daily rate. Now, question is, how much are we going to be crediting? And to get that answer, I got to calculate the number of days correctly. And that's what the challenge is with this question, right? So let's draw the timeline out. Let me help you with this. November 14th is the closing. Okay. November 14th is the closing. And then it said in the question, the insurance started on July 22nd. Is when the insurance started. Okay. So what's I'm prorating the insurance. So what do you think my timeline is going to look like? What's my timeline represent? This is where the tricky part comes. Bless you. Anybody? What do you think? Here, let me help you out. Because this is like, no, I don't know, Joe. I'm totally lost. Okay, here it is. So my timeline is going to go from, because I'm dealing with insurance, is going to go from 7/22 to 7/21 of the following year. Because that insurance premium covers from July 22nd all the way through July 21st of the next year. And then November is going to happen somewhere, I don't know, November somewhere in here, maybe 11/14. So I got to figure all the months, all the time frame from July 22nd. You follow me here? Am I confusing you yet? This is what I got to get a credit from July 22nd through up until 11/13, which is because the 14th is the buyer's day. Go back to the question so you can see it. So we're closing the 14th, but there's assuming a payment that the seller paid it in advance on the 22nd. So that's why the seller needs to get a credit. Let me show you here what it looks like. I've got to get the number of days that the seller will not be in the property that he paid for. So that's the 14th through July 21st of the following year. From here all the way to here, I've got to cover. So that's the months I've got to figure out in here. Which ends up to be the rest of November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, 21 days, 250 days. There's the complexity about this problem. The complexity is that you're being asked to cover the amount of a policy that started way before this closing day. And how much is the seller going to get credited back? So it's the time frame from the closing to when that policy becomes due again, which is July 21st, is the amount the seller needs to get back from the buyer at closing. Is that making sense? How are we doing this? Questions?
So far, so good.
Okay. Cool. All right. All right. Some rest of these in here, you can go online, you can catch these. I got the answers in there for you. I got them with answers and without answers. We got them on the website for you. So you can go through these. If you have any other question, there's another set. There's 2 sets of these in here. If you have any questions on any of the math stuff, you email me, text me, let me know. We'll help you out with this. Okay? All right. We're going to finish our outline now. So that's all this stuff. Responsibility for accuracy at closing. We're responsible. Here's the law. Designated broker who has a relationship with the buyer and seller shall provide, be responsible for, and sign the detailed closing settlement statement for the party they represent. That's the form that we sign at closing, is a settlement statement, because we're responsible. So we got to make sure the purchase price is correct. Negotiations are correct. Prorations are correct. Commissions are accurate. Things that should have been paid by the correct parties. That's our job at closing. Again, what if happens if there's an error that you find and it favors your client? Do you keep quiet? Don't say anything. You're going to get extra money on this if we close. No. License law requires you verify the accuracy. Means you got to bring up any errors that you see. Even on the other side, if you see errors over there, you bring it up. Our job is to make sure it's accurate, period. That's the law. We got to make sure everything's been signed by the parties at closing. We got to make sure all the work that should have been done or committed to be done is finished. Any receipts provided to the parties. All the inclusions are there and the exclusions have been removed. That's our job. Now, we can't make the closing because we're on vacation or we're sick or something happens. Sometimes it happens. We can get another broker in our office to substitute for us. But here's the thing. When that happens, whoever you get to cover you on that closing, to go there for you, they are responsible for that closing, the accuracy of it, as well as you. So if you cover for somebody else, if they can't cover it, you're responsible for the accuracy of that closing as well as that person on the transaction. Okay, 2 different types of documents that we use for calculating these. There's a settlement statement, which is geared towards one side or the other. So there's a buyer settlement statement and there's a seller settlement statement. And there's just single entry on that, either a debit or a credit to one side on a settlement. You'll see example of that here. Okay, you have the sales price is a debit to the buyer. They put $2,000, that's a credit, and they're going to get a loan for $208. That's a credit. Then we calculate the rest of the debits and credits, add up the columns, and we'll find that the buyer needs to bring in, looks like there's going to be some prorations in here for sellers So the buyer's only have to come up $90. Pretty cool, because seller's covering some costs in here for them on this particular example. The other form that you can be tested on is this thing called the 6-column worksheet. The 6-column worksheet is something that is used to help you as a student to calculate the numbers. It also helps you understand as a student how the prorations are being done. But it is a form that you'll never see in the real world once you get past this exam, because we don't use this form. Everything's done through software programs. But we need to understand it. You need to understand it for your exam. So let's look at it. So 6-column worksheet, you will always, if you have a question about a 6-column worksheet, they're going to be typically asking you about a double entry, meaning, look at this. There's a debit and credit. There's a double entry for the buyer, for the seller, and for the broker/title company. Keep that in mind. We're engaging our title company to do this for us, but we're responsible for. That's why it says broker column, not title company. But I don't want you to kind of visualize title company there, so you don't get confused. So when I say double entry, I mean, look, you've got a debit and a credit for a buyer, a debit credit column for the seller, a debit credit column for the broker. So if there's a question that you see in a scenario and it talks about a debit and a credit for one side, they're referring to a 6-column worksheet. If they refer to one single entry debit or single entry credit for one side, they're referring to the settlement statement. Is what I'm trying to help you visualize here. Okay. Good funds. Good funds are these things: cashier's check, electronic funds, or a teller's check for savings and loan. Cash, my friends, are not good funds in Colorado. You got to source that stuff out. Okay. This nice little comparison of who gets debited, who gets credited. You should study this. Some things we've seen on the exam. This doc fee, don't forget about this doc fee. This is closing costs. So for this, you got to know the decimal point place, where to place your decimal point. Always remember, it's 0.1 per 100. So you have a sales price example here, 213,000. You move that decimal point 4 places to the left. So your doc fee is 2130. Move it 4 places. All right. Now that we did all that math, I want to show you the key to the universe and why I had you do that exercise of drawing the timeline out, doing all those things, because I'm going to show you how to answer a question now without having to do any math whatsoever. But you got to do that timeline and calculate the days correct. All right, here we do it. Here's how it works. So, golden rules. Prorations are always the same between buyer and seller. Ace, you discovered that right off the bat. You noticed that. You draw, so the dollar amount of the credit and debit is the same. You draw the timeline to determine who owes what, whom, and you look at the number of days. Are we looking for a big number or a little number in the question? So let me demonstrate this. Taxes for the year 2,456. Says prorated tax entry B for this year's taxes for August 20th closing. What would be the prorated tax entry? So here's your choices. Process of elimination, here's what we're going to do. First, prorations are always between buyer and seller. It's a tax proration. So D, we can get rid of because the broker's involved. That's eliminated. Second, the dollar amount is always the same. So we can get rid of A because that's got a different dollar amount. Now we're faced with a choice of 2. And in your multiple choice questions, folks, it's really usually going to come down to 2. So two things going to happen when you look at the question. You'll narrow it down to two, or the other thing may happen is this. You may look at the question and in your mind go, I know this, I know the answer. And you're looking for the answer and it's not there. Don't freak out. They're testing to see if you know the best answer from what's available. So you may not see the exact one. You're going, that's a bogus question. Well, what's the closest thing you can come to that's going to be the best of what to choose from? You see, because in real estate, that's what we're faced with on a daily basis. It's not black and white out there, folks. We're faced with having to make decisions on what's the best course of action with what we have to deal with. So either you're going to get narrowed down to two, or you're going to be figuring out what's the best answer, closest to what I know what the answer is. All right, so we've narrowed it down to two right now, okay? So the last thing we can do is we need to look at our timeline to answer without doing any math. Because on the timeline, we're going to see on this one, the seller owns the house for more days than the buyer. So we want a bigger number versus a smaller number. So we can get rid of B. The answer is C because that's the bigger number choice to choose from. Did you see how we did that now without doing any math? You got to be able to get that visual, though, that timeline to do this correctly. Okay. All right. Last couple things here is the certificate of taxes. That's a county document, comes from the county, and they verify the taxes owed. If there's a mistake on that, that's on the county's part, not ours. And then the last thing is the real property transfer declaration. That's where they break out the personal property from the sales price, and they ask the buyer, what's the condition of that property? And we usually advise our clients to mark on their average, because if they put anything above that, then they could trigger a reassessment of that property tax. Okay. All right. That wraps up the session, folks. We went 3 minutes over. We did prorations, we did settlement. That wraps up the state review. Next week, we'll have a study hall week, kind of. We'll just meet for an hour on Monday and Tuesday evening. If you guys have any questions, if you have any questions specifically, email us. Let us know you're not getting something. We'll cover it. Okay? So it's kind of like an open forum. You can ask questions about anything on your review that you don't understand. And that'll be on Monday and Tuesday. Does anybody have any questions on what we covered today? Y'all were great engagement today. I appreciate that. But if there's something I glossed over a little bit quickly, is there anything I can help you out with before we end our session?
You did a great job explaining everything, Joe. Thank you.
What's an assumption?
What's an assumption? That's when we're taking over the payments of an existing loan. Sometimes it's also called subject to. You'll see this, Ace, when we go into the national review under finance, we cover that in there. So assumption, I'm assuming the payments from somebody, taking over the payments. Good question.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else have any other questions for me?
Yeah, I have a question. How long do we have to send the assessments in?
How long do we have to send the assessment in?
Yeah, so for the overall, in order to get your certificate.
Oh, your certificate of eligibility. So, okay, so to get your certificate of eligibility, I didn't understand what you meant. So to get your certificate of eligibility, 3 things you have to do. 1, you have to get an 85% or better on your final exams for the national and the state, the 2 different exams. And the other is you submit a study log showing the time that you put in that will add up to be 168 or more. It's usually more. And you can count the time that you spend here with us in class towards that. So you submit both of those. And there's some other things you'll see on the final things you need to accomplish to get your Rec 33. That's on our website. You submit that, and then within 24 hours, you get your certificate of eligibility, your Rec 33.
Okay. Now, do they give us a deadline? So once we do all of that and we go try to get our license, how long do they give us a timeline for that?
Once you get your Rec 33, that you've gone through the class, you can take up to a year. I've even had people after maybe even a couple years be able to use the class and still take the test. So you've got time after you complete the course to take your exam. I wouldn't encourage to do that though. I always encourage the students that I teach in here. When you get through with this and you get your final exams and you got your Rec 33, schedule that test and take it, because the longer you wait, the information is going to start, you'll lose it, right? You don't use it, you lose it. So while it's fresh in your mind, schedule the exam and take it.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Somebody else might have other questions for me? All right. Well, that wraps up the session, folks. Thanks for being with me here today. I hope you got something out of this and learned something new.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're very welcome. You all have a good rest of your day.
God bless
You
everybody.
too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.